Hello, I'm Michael Graziano, and welcome to part 4 of How to Compose a Symphony. In the previous videos, we sketched out the first movement of a classical symphony, and we began to orchestrate it. In this video, we'll finish orchestrating the exposition, roughly the first third of the movement. I want to focus mostly on one aspect, using the woodwinds. It's amazing how many different colors and textures you can get out of the woodwinds. I'll pick up where we left off, right here. First, I'm going to fill in the string parts, and I'll speed that up because it isn't the emphasis of the lesson here. The music is already all in the sketch, and I'm only filling in the harmonies. How to write harmony and voice leading would be a whole separate video series. To write a symphony, you actually don't need to know any of that. I've written symphonies that are full of modern, crunchy sounds that don't follow any rules of harmony. If it sounds good to you, then it's right for you. But since we're writing a classical symphony here, I better follow the rules of harmony. Now let's listen to what we have so far. The strings by themselves are like bread in a sandwich. They give you the main structure. Now we need the fixings. I think I'll put the horns in here, just to give more weight to the sound in those first few measures. Now let's put in some woodwinds. Let's use the woodwinds as melodic color. The oboes won't play through the whole melody. They come in briefly, change the color for a couple measures, and then drop out. And I think the sound I want is not just the oboes. I want something more robust, less delicate. Let's double them an octave lower with the bassoons. Together they have a bite and a rasp. This note is orange because, in the program's opinion, I've gone too high for a bassoon. But this is not true. Bassoons can go quite high, very beautifully, especially when it's supported by something else, oboe and strings in this case. I like high bassoons. It's boring to have two back-to-back measures of the same thing, so let's change it again by adding the flutes. And let's do something cute to add a little extra color twist at the end. Let's listen to the horns and woodwinds so far. Now let's listen to the full orchestra. The texture is changing every measure. In the first measure, we have the upper strings in octaves. In the next measure, the strings are in richer harmony, no longer in octaves, which changes the sound. In the next measure, the oboes and bassoons come in to double the melody. Then the flutes come in. Every measure, the instruments shift and change so that your ears never get bored. For the next measure, let's leave the strings as they are. The music ducks down a little, and we drop out the woodwinds, another change in color. And next, I'm hearing some horns come in. The orchestral sound changes again. Now we have a new tune, the second main tune of the piece, light and charming. Let's give it some woodwind color. We've done oboes and bassoons. Let's switch it up and do flutes and bassoons here. They're 2 octaves apart and make a beautiful combination. Let's listen to a few measures of it. I think the change is too abrupt here. It's a very important moment, the entrance of the second theme, and it pops out too nakedly. Let's make one tiny change. The horns can carry over that gap, give a little more continuity, and connect the 2 parts. Now let's listen to those measures. Much better. Such a tiny change makes such a big difference. You don't just want the orchestration to constantly change. The secret is a subtle balance between change and continuity, between sudden and gradual. Let's go on to the next segment. Again, I'll fill in the string parts quickly here. And underneath, let's add something fun, an offbeat counter rhythm. To me, a lot of orchestration is a strategic use of counter rhythms. You create a sense of different orchestral personalities, jumping up and saying different things in a big conversation. Because the music is so light, I'm leaving out the double bass. I think Mozart would probably have left them in, but to my modern ear, used to a heavy bass section, I prefer to leave them out of light passages. Let's listen and then think about what to add. I think we could use some horn emphasis here. Once again, the theme of today's lesson. Let's use the woodwinds to add color to the melody. We'll add the oboes and bassoons here to make the sound a little more incisive. And we can put our flutes here, not as a melody anymore, but hanging in the background, resonating with the horns. The flutes and the horns make a wonderful alliance when they're sustaining a background note. And now we're ready for an explosion of 16th notes. Let's use flutes and oboes. We haven't used that specific combination yet. It's light, in the high register, and has a brilliance to it. To keep the flute in its range, I have to jump up in the middle. Same for the oboes, but I'm jumping up in a different part of the melody. I don't want a sudden discontinuity in both instruments at the same time. Many people make a mistake here. They think the goal is to make a passage like this so smooth that you don't notice the jumps in register, as if these jumps are a necessary mistake to be covered up. But that is not true at all. These changes of register give a quirky, lively, unexpectedly changing sound, exactly what you want. A feature, not a bug. Sometimes the bassoons are just the thing for doubling the bass line, giving it a little extra emphasis, a little grit, when you want that bass line to pop out. This is a much more traditional, Haydnesque use of the bassoons. I'll leave the violins alone here. It's seductively easy to pile woodwinds onto every melody, and you really shouldn't. The high violins, especially after that dramatic jump, make a statement. They have their own sound, and they make a good contrast to what came before. Now let's listen. You really start to hear these constantly shifting alliances. Let's move on to the next segment. I'll fill in the string parts, and again, I'm not saying much about the string orchestration. It's important, but the emphasis in this lesson is on the woodwinds, and I don't want to get sucked down into the complexities of string writing. But just to note, the same principles apply. The alliances and sonorities are constantly changing. We have a loud part coming up, so I'm going to save the horns, the only brass instrument we have. I'll give them a rest until then. But for the woodwinds, let's do something fun. Let's remove the melody entirely from the strings and give it to the woodwinds. Now, for a measure, the strings are playing the accompaniment only. The woodwinds have their own voice. A flute by itself is not going to cut it here. We need something robust. All three of them, flutes, oboes, and bassoons. Notice I don't have them doubling each other in unison. They're an octave apart. When you put flutes and oboes in unison, or any two woodwinds, it can work, but it gives a very weird, unearthly sound. It blends out the quirky character of each instrument. It loses some integrity. The woodwinds can switch back to the accompaniment here, the counter rhythm. What are we going to do with this part? This is a very wry little part. A new bit of thematic material pops in for an instant before we go loud with the closing theme. Let's throw in the oboes here, and the flutes here, doubling the melody, giving a little different color to the strings, an oboe twist here, a flute twist there. I'll pop in the bassoons at the bottom. You could fix up this passage many different ways. The choices I'm making here are motivated partly by showing you all of the sonorities that you can get out of the woodwinds. We've used all the basic possibilities: singly, flute, oboe, bassoon, in combination, all together, and previously we used them all in every possible pair. That's 7 different sounds you can get out of these 3 instruments, and that doesn't even begin to touch the different registers, like high and low bassoons, high and low oboes. You usually don't put your flutes low because they'll disappear. You won't hear them over the rest of the orchestra. Okay, let's listen to that section. It's very charming, joking and light, and therefore it sets up for a contrast. The closing theme can be loud and mighty. You see the double bar. We're approaching the end of the exposition, which is our target for today. Let me fill in the string parts. Again, I won't say much about the strings, but notice that this time I'm leaving in some double stops, where the violin plays 2 notes at the same time, the bow hitting 2 strings. You can play double stops quietly, of course, but here they communicate an intention, play it strong and punchy. So far today, we've focused on using the woodwinds melodically, but now let's use them in a fundamentally different way. Let's go into mighty mode, where the woodwinds and horns play block chords, like a hammer hitting some big resonating bell. I like to fill in the horns first, as an independent entity, and then the woodwinds together as another entity. The horns are very high here. At the top of their range, they will sound like an almighty shout. Notice also, I'm marking the horns forte for the first time in the piece. The closing theme is the moment to unleash all your forces. Let's listen to the horns and woodwinds together. And let's listen to the whole orchestra together. It's very good, but it's not quite right. The very end needs work. I can give it a bouncy accompaniment, a counter rhythm. Let's listen to the last measures. It's still too naked. It needs a little more tension as it hones back in to the key of C. Let's try a woodwind chord in the background, just hanging in the air, outlining the unstable harmony. Let's listen to that. That works much better. And we're ready to listen to the whole exposition now from the beginning. Now that's a classical symphony. It sounds totally different from the sketch. So much more vibrant, so much more interesting. But we're not done yet. Next time, we'll tackle the development section, where the real drama happens.